A police raid against Brazil's second largest gang leads to over 100 deaths in what is the deadliest police raid in Brazil's history. A Canadian Hells Angels member arrested for the murder of an innocent woman amidst Quebec's brutal drug war. All of that and much more on this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. On Tuesday afternoon, Mathieu Pelletier, a member of the Quebec City chapter of the Hells Angels, was arrested at Toronto's Pearson International Airport just as he was about to board a flight to Mexico. Pelletier was charged with orchestrating the December 2024 murder of a woman named Jennifer Morin, which occurred as part of the ongoing 2-year-long war between the Hells Angels and the Blood Family Mafia gang over drug turf in Quebec. He was also charged with gangsterism and conspiracy to kill Jeffrey Morin, Jennifer Morin's son, and a member of the Blood Family Mafia, who was the actual target for assassination when she ended up dead. Although Jennifer Morin is considered an innocent victim in the drug war, back in 2021 she was arrested along with 8 other individuals, but she escaped without any charges. Jeffrey Morin himself was sentenced to 7 years in prison this past summer after being caught in a sting where he sold cocaine and meth along with 3 assault rifles to an undercover police agent. Now to the man accused of orchestrating the murder of Jennifer Morin, Mathieu Pelletier. He is the son of Marc Tom Pelletier, one of the founders of the Quebec City chapter of the Hells Angels. He only recently became a full-patched member of the Hells Angels in 2023 after being a member of the Red Devils, a Hells Angels support club. Pelletier established a working relationship with Dave Pic Turmel, the leader of the Blood Family Mafia in Quebec City, who had managed to consolidate all street gangs in the area under the BFM banner. For some time, Pelletier supplied Turmel and the BFM with drugs, and all was smooth until the winter of 2023, when Turmel stopped paying the 10% royalty fee demanded by the Hells Angels for other gangs to sell drugs in Quebec. And this has been something that's been in place ever since the Quebec Biker War of the 1990s. The Hells Angels managed to increase their power after the war, and this 10% royalty fee has been in place ever since then. His complete snubbing of the Hells Angels would be followed by Pelletier having his home shot up by the BFM and would eventually spiral into the drug war that has been raging in Quebec ever since, with murders, including those of innocent civilians, multiple arsons, and brutal incidents such as the kidnapping and torture of relatives of another prominent Hells Angels member. It is against the backdrop of this brutal turf war that the murder of Jennifer Morin occurred. One morning in December 2024, police were called to Morin's residence in Charlebourg, Quebec, where they located her body. Her death was soon ruled a murder as the body showed multiple signs of violence, and it was determined that Morin had been shot dead after opening her door to individuals who had been looking for her son, Jeffrey, who also lived with her. And just last month in September, 13 individuals aged 18 to 51 were also arrested by police in Quebec and Ontario for playing a role in the murder of Jennifer Morin, before Mathieu Pelletier, who himself had his home shot up twice this past year alone, was arrested this past week for being the one who allegedly orchestrated the whole plot. On Thursday, Pelletier was transferred back to Quebec City from Toronto, where he was officially charged. He has been ordered into pretrial detention, and his next court appearance is scheduled for November 18th. The arrest of Mathieu Pelletier is a huge blow for the Hells Angels. He was one of the people leading their war campaign against the Blood Family Mafia, and this for sure will be a benefit for the Blood Family Mafia. He can be pointed to as the reason that this war started in the first place, because he was the point of contact with Dave Turmel for the Hells Angels, and Turmel turned against the Hells Angels by first going after him. Overall, though, 2025 has seen a dramatic decrease in activities in relation to the Hells Angels and Blood Family Mafia war. 2024 was a much more turbulent year, and 2025 saw high-profile incidents between the two factions decrease, but it is still believed to be very much ongoing. It's just that multiple leading figures on both sides have been arrested, and the groups are both trying to regroup from their losses. But an interesting development in this long-running drug war that has shaken the Quebec region. Even though Mathieu Pelletier may be incarcerated for quite a while to come, it's not like he's out of harm's way, as the Blood Family Mafia also has many of its members currently incarcerated in prisons throughout Quebec, so he will have to watch his back once behind bars. But the future for Mathieu Pelletier, one of the most influential members of the Quebec City chapter of the Hells Angels, looks very dim at this point. And if I were to guess, the Blood Family Mafia are going to take advantage of this opportunity, and they're going to feel more emboldened to go after the Hells Angels and claim what they believe is rightfully theirs. On Saturday, October 25th, the body of Mexican journalist Miguel Angel Beltran was found wrapped in a blanket on a stretch of highway in the Mexican state of Durango after he had been reported missing 2 days prior. He was 60 years old. Next to his body was a written note that translated to, quote, "for spreading lies about the people of Durango," end quote. Beltran had been a prominent journalist in Mexico for decades, working for media outlets in Durango such as La Voz de Durango and Contexto, where he reported on organized crime and corruption. At one point, he was the spokesperson for Mexico's National Union of Education Workers, where he championed the importance of access to information in marginalized communities. In recent years, he took the independent route of journalism and used social media, where he recorded videos of himself discussing drug cartels operating in Durango, such as the Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels, who have been disputing territory throughout the state. Just 5 days prior to his murder, he made a post on TikTok where he discussed the activities of the Cabrera Sarabia family and the recent arrest of one of their associates. The Cabrera Sarabia brothers are based out of Durango, where they act as suppliers of marijuana and heroin for the Sinaloa Cartel, cultivating the drugs on land that they control in Durango. They are said to have played a fundamental role in the Sinaloa Cartel since at least 1996. At one time, there were 4 brothers. One of the brothers, Alberto, was killed in a shootout with the Mexican Armed Forces in 2012, and the former leader of the family, Felipe, was captured back in 2011 and has since been extradited to the United States to face drug trafficking charges. But despite the removal of 2 brothers from the scene, the Cabrera Sarabia brothers continue to be influential players in the Mexican drug trade, and it is now said that brother Alejandro runs the family's criminal operations. Since war broke out between the Los Chapitos and Los Mayos factions of the Sinaloa Cartel last year, the Cabrera Sarabias have allied with Los Mayos, the faction once led by Ismael Mayo Zambada, and now led by his son Ismael Zambada Siqueiros, or Maito Flaco. They are even said to have sheltered El Mayo at various points prior to his capture last year. At this point, it's unknown if the Cabrera Sarabias had anything to do with Beltran's murder, but they are highly suspected of carrying out since they were the subject of a recent video he made, but that remains to be seen as no one has yet been arrested for his murder. According to the organization Reporters Without Borders, Miguel Angel Beltran is the 7th journalist to have been assassinated in Mexico this year. All these journalists assassinated this year specifically covered corruption and organized crime, and Mexico now ranks as the most dangerous country for journalists to operate in Latin America. This story perfectly illustrates the dangers of covering organized crime and corruption in Mexico. I have a lot of respect for these journalists in Mexico who are willing to put their lives on the line to cover these stories that need to be covered as these cartels increasingly come to infiltrate everyday aspects of life in Mexico. They're not just involved in the drug trade, they're also involved in the extortion of small businesses, and they have managed to infiltrate many of the legal economies, such as the produce business and the fishing industry. And it's sad whenever a journalist like Miguel Angel Beltran is killed for reporting on the truth. Sadly, he's not going to be the last journalist killed by a Mexican drug cartel for reporting things they don't like. The fact that Beltran was killed, I think, perhaps shows that he was saying some true things about certain powerful people potentially involved in the drug trade that they obviously took issue with. And because of that, they felt threatened enough and saw the only option was to kill him. A tragic story, but I commend reporters like Miguel Angel Beltran, all reporters that have fallen in the line of duty, and all current reporters in Mexico still out there for their work, as without these individuals, much would not be known about what is going on currently in the Mexican criminal underworld. And to them, I say thank you for being brave enough to expose the truth on these individuals who cause great destruction in Mexico and bring further light to these issues. On the morning of Tuesday, October 28th, a massive operation was launched by police forces in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, on the orders of the state's far-right governor, Claudio Castro. The target was Comando Vermelho, or the Red Command in English, the second largest criminal organization in the country. This raid was to be the culmination of a year-long investigation into drug trafficking activities involving the Red Command in the area in what has been dubbed Operation Containment, as the authorities aim to stop the rapid expansion of the Red Command, who have managed to expand from Rio to more than 20 states across Brazil and more than 100 cities across the Amazon. A little bit of a background on the Red Command. They are Brazil's oldest criminal group. It was started in the late 1970s in a Rio de Janeiro prison while the country was ruled by a military dictatorship, and much like the rival Primeiro Comando de Capital, PCC or First Capital Command, its rival, who are Brazil's most powerful criminal organization, the Red Command was started as a self-protection group for prisoners and was initially made up of common criminals and leftist militants. The Red Command would eventually spread to prisons all across Brazil. However, as time went on, the ideological roots of the Red Command, also like the PCC, eventually was replaced by pure criminality as the group expanded outside the prisons and became heavily involved in orchestrating large-scale bank robberies before expanding into the cocaine trade in the 1980s, establishing close ties with Colombian cartels and entrenching themselves into Rio de Janeiro's favelas, becoming their own de facto government across much of the city, using the favelas as bases to traffic and sell cocaine, often with the full complicity of the favela's residents. It is estimated that the Red Command has more than 30,000 members across Brazil. Now back to this past Tuesday morning. That morning, more than 2,500 police officers on foot, as well as in helicopters, armored vehicles, and demolition vehicles, descended on the Alemão and Penha favelas, well-known strongholds of the Red Command in the north zone of Rio de Janeiro. The Alemão and Penha favelas encompass more than 26 communities and are home to more than 200,000 people. With 100 arrest warrants and 150 search and seizure warrants against various leaders of the Red Command in their possession, the police forces entered the favelas, where they were promptly greeted with drones overhead that started dropping grenades, along with gunfire from high-powered weapons. In addition to this, dozens of buses were set aflame across the favelas to be used as barricades to prevent the police from advancing. Throughout the whole ordeal, civilians filmed the carnage in videos that captured the echoes of gunfire and smoke billowing into the sky from the buses set aflame. When the shootings and bombings were over, a reported 132 people had been killed, including 4 police officers, in what is now the deadliest police raid in the history of Rio de Janeiro. Some members of the Red Command even fled into the forests behind the favelas, and their bodies were later found having been pursued by the police into the forests. The following morning, authorities handed over dozens of bodies of men who had been killed in the raid. In a dramatic scene, the bodies were piled side by side on a street as relatives and bystanders gathered around, some reduced to tears and screams at the loss of their loved ones. It is also being reported, in addition to the fighting between the police and the Red Command, that members of the Terceiro Comando Puro, or the Third Pure Command, arch rivals of the Red Command, took the opportunity amidst the chaos to take out members of the Red Command. One of the members of the TCP even filmed himself shooting a CV member in the head. And as a side note, the Red Command and the Third Pure Command, for years now, have been engaged in a brutal turf war for control of favelas across Rio de Janeiro that has seen scores of shooting deaths. There's honestly too many to count at this point, as they both constantly tried to invade each other's favelas that they control. In addition to all these killings that took place this past Tuesday, 113 people were arrested as part of the operation, 10 of whom were minors. Among the arrested individuals that morning was Thiago do Nascimento Mendes, the right-hand man of Edgar Alves de Andrade, one of the leaders of the Red Command in the Penha favela, and he was the top target of that day's operation, although it seems that they are unable to locate him. Along with the arrests, 75 rifles were seized that day. The chaos surrounding the siege of the two favelas caused much disruption to the average civilian in Rio de Janeiro, as 5 primary care units in the area were forced to shut their doors for hours. All 28 schools located within the favelas were closed for the day, and 12 bus lines had their routes diverted as precautionary measures. The vast carnage and death the morning of October 28th comes just 1 week before Rio de Janeiro hosts the C40 Global Summit to tackle climate change, and it is suspected that the police in Rio de Janeiro potentially carried out this operation in order to clean up the streets ahead of this conference. They did this previously for the World Cup back in 2014, with similar results occurring back then. Also in the days after this police operation, many residents of the favelas took to the streets to protest the actions of the police, who they believe used excessive force, and because of their actions caused much chaos and destruction in their communities. To me, it seems pretty disgusting that the politicians in Rio de Janeiro Janeiro would launch this operation just to appease politicians coming from all across the world. Because of this event occurring, they were willing to sacrifice hundreds of lives just to present a clean city. To me, that's pretty disgusting that they were willing to carry out this lethal operation with horrible ramifications just to present themselves as a better city. I'm someone who keeps a very close eye on the activities going on in Brazil, especially regarding the 1st Capital Command and the Red Command. And without exaggerating, it seems like every single week there is a police operation that occurs in which either members of the PCC or the CV are targeted, and members of the groups are gunned down in firefights between the police. The police in Brazil have long been accused of engaging in extrajudicial killings. Many of them are also rumored to be heavily corrupt and themselves involved in the drug trade. However, when you read the news, you never get this impression. You always just get the impression that the police are taking out a gang member who refused to surrender. Oftentimes, I believe that the true facts of many of these shootings are being hidden by the police. I feel that they have a lot of blood on their hands and that they unnecessarily kill a lot of these gang members. Not to excuse the actions of members of gangs like the 1st Capital Command and the Red Command, but it seems like sometimes the police are more willing to shoot them down than arrest them. And the operation that occurred this week is a perfect example of that, as more people were shot dead than were even arrested. This also occurs as these gangs fight amongst each other. The Red Command and the 1st Capital Command had a truce for many years until 2016, when that truce was broken, and ever since then, they have been at war with each other. And other groups have sprung up, such as the 3rd Pure Command that I mentioned earlier, and this only further increases the bloodshed being spilled across Brazil's streets. While the PCC has in recent years focused more on international cocaine trafficking, this has allowed the CV and the TCP to greatly expand their controls over the favelas and cocaine routes from countries such as Colombia and Peru. And it's because of the expansion of groups like the Red Command that the police have more heavily been targeting them, as their presence is much more visible across Brazil, especially in the favelas. But to me, this was an unnecessary and overly aggressive operation by the Rio de Janeiro police to target the Red Command. In my opinion, this is going to do nothing to solve the issues of these drug gangs. I think, if anything, incidents like these are going to make the average civilians more resentful of the police and more likely to side with the drug traffickers. So, in my opinion, the police did themselves no favors by carrying out this bloody operation. But I'm sure the police will not learn their lesson from this, and more operations like these will continue in the future. And unfortunately, much more blood is going to be shed as the Red Command, the 1st Capital Command, and the 3rd Pure Command fight against each other and fight the police, as blood continues to spill on streets all across Brazil as the country becomes an ever more important cog in the international cocaine trade. All right, that's going to do it for this week's edition of Organized Crime News Weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Just want to remind everyone to please like, share, and subscribe so we can help grow this channel. Also, please make sure to support my channel. You can do that by just contributing $2.99 a month. Any contribution is greatly appreciated, and it helps me to continue making these videos. I'll be back next week to report on more stories concerning the global criminal underworld. Thank you so much for tuning in.